Good evening. Shalom. Welcome to Rock Creek. For those of you that are familiar, glad you're back. I hope you had a great weekend here at Rock Creek. And for those that are guests, this is Pastor Brad, and this is a brand new facility. So glad that you're here tonight, each and every one of you, to learn more about Israel, the past, the present, and we might even get into the future a little bit. But we've got a very special guest here tonight who is widely known in Israel as being one of the finest, if not the finest, professional guides in the land. I know this because several years back, about 13 years ago now, Shmulik, 13 years ago, I took a tour with 72 people from 6 different countries. We had 2 buses, and I had 2 guides. I had one guide named David, and then I had this other guide I'd never met before named Shmulik, or Sammy, as your mother liked to call you, Shmulik. And as we were progressing throughout the tour, I began to notice every morning there was a line at Shmulik's bus and no line at David's bus. So the people voted with their feet, Pastor Brad, and so came to find out that we were very fortunate to have Shmulik. So for our next tour, which was actually with Rock Creek about 3 years ago, we worked with Shmulik's calendar to find out when he was available, and he did that tour. Brad was on that tour, and many of you that were here tonight. Others have been on tours with Shmulik. I know that the Bakers are here tonight. The Bakers are 2 experiences with Shmulik in the land. He was so good, they wanted to come back and do it all over again. We do have a trip planned in November for Rock Creek Church, and we're very excited about that. Tell you more about that at the very end. But for now, we are so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for your interest in Israel. And I'm going to hand it over to Pastor Brad. Thank you so much, Brad, for having us tonight. Appreciate
You're welcome, John. Thanks so much. Come on, just welcome Shmulik for being here. So the only reason why I'm up here is just to keep redirecting him. And if there's something that he says that I think would be cool to talk about because we experienced it on our trip, I might press into that. But we're going to go for 90 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&A. And Pastor John will come around with a mic, so you just raise your hand, he'll get to you, and he will get you to ask your question in the mic so that Shmulik can hear you, and then he'll answer it. And super excited to have you here at Rock Creek. Super excited to see you again, my friend. And so take it away. What I call as the walking Bible.
I saw that. That was nice and embarrassing. But okay, so thank you guys for coming. My name is Shmulik. I've lived in Israel since I was a year and 10 months old. I was born in Rome to British parents, and when I was a year and 10 months old, they immigrated to Israel. We lived on the northwestern Israeli shore right under the border with Lebanon. And that's where I was raised, and my brothers and sisters. In 1999, 98, I was going through a little bit of a crisis. I had a job that had me in the States a lot, but my first 2 nephews had already been born to both my sisters. And I started losing interest in being abroad and missing their development. You know, something happens when a nephew is born or whatever. And I started looking for a profession that would keep me in Israel more. And through what I can only imagine was a bout of severe mental illness, I decided to register for the School of Tourism and become a tour guide. I say that like I love guiding. The only thing is, it's a profession that is influenced but very much by anything that happens in the world or in the region. So some little virus escaped from the Far East in 2020 or late 2019, and then the whole world was shut down. I lost 2 years of income. And then we had a year and a half of great income, and then, of course, October 7th, and it's been obviously tourists were not coming ever since. So I sometimes think that I must have been mentally ill when I chose the profession, but I didn't realize until I was sitting with John on Tuesday at a cafe, and we were talking about these 2 appointments, and he had his laptop, and he started opening pictures of sites. And he's going through, and I started saying, oh, yeah, that's where this, oh, that's where that. And suddenly I realized within about half an hour or an hour, I was like fired up. And then I suddenly realized that much as I think, I must have been mental to take the profession, I love it. It's just a fun place. I spent my childhood actually complaining to my parents. I had no memories of England, but I complained to my parents all the time, why did you take us from such a cultured country to this third world dump? Which Israel was third world when I was growing up. It's very modern these days. But then I lived in England for a year and a half when I was doing college. And when I came back to Israel, I then started working in America, and I started realizing I actually like Israel quite a bit. And when I guided, initially I guided tourists from Nigeria, and it's a whole story about how they get to Israel, but their tours are paid by the Nigerian government. Their round-trip ticket, the 11-night hotel stay, 3 meals a day, and get this, $500 per person spending money that they receive. And I realized that although some of them were from very simple places, these were not dumb people. Like when we'd be in Caesarea, I talked to them about Herod or Jesus, and the lights, I'd see the lights going on, I'd see that they're totally with me. And then I realized, these people are real believers, but most of them will not be coming back. It's a once-in-a-lifetime trip for them. And so I suddenly realized I'm in a very privileged position where if I get my act together properly and I do my job well, hopefully for the rest of their lives, every time they open the Bible and read about some story, 1 Kings 18, Ahab is challenged by Elijah, who's sent by God to tell him, until I say, otherwise there'll be no rain. They'll go, oh, wait a minute. Their brain will wake up and go, I was there, and it was here, and then we saw that from there, and we saw that, because where that happened is you've got amazing views of a huge section of Israel, because it's on the top of Mount Carmel. And so it really changed the way that I approached guiding. I sat down at nights and I just planned how I'm going to do stuff with the hopes of sort of like planting a seed. And Nigerians are also very gregarious. They're a lot of fun. They sing like nobody's business. And pretty soon I was asking them to teach me their songs. And I learned, they teach me to sing. A lot of my tourists from Nigeria, from a state, Nigeria is kind of like the States. It's 36 states. A lot of them were from a place called Adamawa, a state called Adamawa. So they speak Hausa there. There's like 1,000 dialects in Nigeria, but they speak Hausa. And I learned to sing with them. And I was the happiest in the world singing with Nigerian tourists. It was just kind of a privilege. Anyway, and then I started working with American tourists, and again, I was very surprised when I'd suddenly see, like, you can literally see the lights switching on in people's eyes. And then I realized that for a lot of Americans, for a lot of people anywhere in the world who believe, they believe the Bible, they believe the New Testament, but it's sort of like the Chronicles of Narnia to them. They believe in it, they've never seen it, they can't quite, you sort of imagine Cair Paravel over here and the giants over there. But when they come to Israel and they suddenly see that these are actually real places, and they go to those real places, and then when they're there, you can get into the background, because many times the Bible just tells you this and this and this happened, and he said that, and he said that, and then they went home. But when you put it in its context, you understand that there's way more to these stories. And I could see people like really being affected, and the more I saw that, the more I realized I'm in a very privileged position, and I need to really do my best to make connections for people and to just get them to enjoy it, to learn. Although, and I'm sure there are several ladies here in the crowd that have been on my tours, and men, that will say that I also love, because we learn a lot on the tours. We talk a lot about the Bible. We talk a lot about history, modern history, ancient history, biblical battles, different nations that conquer the land. But then there's times on the bus, or there's just, you start getting to know the people on the tour, and there's this banter that develops. And I love, God forgive me, harassing my tourists, just picking on them, harassing them. John mentioned something today that I did with, it's so typical of me. We were on the way to an amazing place called Herodium. Ooh, we need to talk about Herodium. And there's a security check when you leave that to come back from the West Bank into Israel. And so I have no recollections of this, but unfortunately I know myself and I believe him. And apparently there was a very big security guy, and I went off the bus to talk to him. And we came back on board, and I said, okay, he wants all of you with your hands on your head. And everyone goes, and I said, oh, give me a break, you know, we're just, or there'll be an old lady that I like to pick on a group, and when we come to a checkpoint, sometimes they agree to cooperate with me, and sometimes they don't. When they get on the bus, I'm always sitting in the front, and I say, Maggie Smith, get off the bus, you know. And when they do it, it's like, because it's someone that I always accuse of being a terrorist, that I suspect her of being a terrorist. I don't think she's a real part of the church, whatever. And I like to harass my tourists. So it's a lot of interest, it's a lot of learning, but it's also a lot of completely ridiculous goofing off, which makes it more bearable for, I'm sure, for the tourists and for me. It just becomes fun once you know your tourists. So we're looking at here at a picture of Jerusalem from the point of view of the Mount of Olives. There's another one. Okay, that's a good picture. Why don't we do, I'll just go very briefly, hopefully, through the history of the development of Jerusalem over the ages. So we'll take it biblically. We'll go to when Abram came to the land, which is about 1800 BC. And you remember God told him, get out of your father's home and go to a land that I will show you. And he leads him to a land called Canaan. It wasn't known as Israel at the time. And Abram comes and eventually has a son called Isaac, which is a great fulfillment. You know, they didn't think they're going to get this baby because God had promised it long before, and it wasn't happening. And unfortunately, Abraham and Sarah thought they could help God, which was a huge mistake. But eventually they have Isaac, and then when Isaac is 13, God says to him, take him to a mountain that I will show you and sacrifice him to me. And God leads him to, it doesn't look like it, but this is a mountain called Mount Moriah. It was messed with later on, 1800 years later, by someone that we'll mention in a few minutes, but it was a hill. Mount Moriah was a hill that went up to the north, and if you have a little bit of a rough time believing it, if you look to the walls of the old city, by the way, these walls are built by the Ottoman Turks when they controlled the land from 1517 till 1917 they controlled, and they built these walls from 1537 till 1941. Suleiman the Magnificent was the Ottoman Sultan who built them. If you follow the walls to the right, they're not very tall. Now follow the same walls to the left, and you see that they have to go a lot deeper to hit the bedrock. And that's because Mount Moriah used to be a hilltop. And that is where God leads Abraham and has him build an altar, and he obediently binds Isaac on it, but God intervenes last moment and said, Al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar, don't send your hand against the boy or whatever, and Isaac is spared. A ram is given in his stead, and Isaac survives and gets to get married, and he has two sons. One of them is called Jacob. Jacob at some point leaves the land, goes to a relative called Laban, and he gets married twice and then has two concubines, 12 sons, and at least one daughter called Dinah. And then his favorite wife, Rachel, dies at some point when they get back to the land. On the way back to the land of Canaan, which was still called Canaan at the time, he struggles all night with an angel. And come morning, he says to the angel, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the angel says, okay, I'm changing your name to Israel. So now that Jacob is called Israel, his children are the children of Israel. And one of his sons is a guy called Joseph. He's got his favorite son from his adored wife, Rachel. He makes him a coat of many colors. Joseph has all these dreams and is not very wise and discreet about the way he shares them with his brothers, who don't appreciate what those dreams might mean. And at some point, they throw him into a pit, sell him to a band of Ishmaelites, and take him off to Egypt, where he's sold as a slave. And he is bought by one of Pharaoh's top officers, a guy by the name of Potiphar, and pretty quickly rises to be in charge of Potiphar's home, but is accused of something he didn't do and thrown into jail. Interprets the dreams a while later of Pharaoh's butler and baker, who he threw into jail, and those dreams come true. The baker is burnt. Beheaded. my mom used to tell me years ago, when George Bush the father was president, she said to me, and he had a minister, a Secretary of State called James Baker, who gave Israel this choice: you either say yes to the Palestinians, or we're not guaranteeing this loan of $50 billion that Israel was asking America to guarantee that we were going to take from the International Bank. And Baker insisted that we say yes to the Palestinians, and my mother said to me, you know, Pharaoh was much better than President Bush. I said, why is that? And she goes, because at least he hung his baker. She was not too happy with it. My mother was slightly outspoken, adorable, funny woman. Anyway, Joseph, at some point Pharaoh has a dream after he hung his baker and restored the butler. He asks all his wise men and counselors to interpret the dream. They can't figure it out. He's furious and livid and desperate. And his butler comes to him and he says, you know, when I was in jail, if you remember, you jailed me, we had dreams, me and the baker, and there was this guy called Joseph, and he interpreted them, and he was exactly right. You hung the baker, you reinstalled me. And so Pharaoh asks for Joseph to be brought. Joseph interprets his dream, basically says your dream means it's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 really tough years of basically famine. And Pharaoh is impressed with Joseph, pulls him out of jail, puts him in charge of Egypt. He's like the governor of Egypt, and asks him to prepare Egypt for that famine that was going to come, which is what Joseph does. When the famine comes, it doesn't just hit Egypt, it hits the whole region, the whole Middle East. And Israel, Jacob, and his sons up in the land of Canaan, they're suffering as well from this hunger, and everyone hears that there's bread in Egypt because of some brilliant governor. And so Jacob sends Israel sends his sons to Egypt, and they meet with the governor to get bread. The governor immediately recognizes them. They're still dressed like Canaanites. He's no longer dressed like Canaanites, and he was a kid. He's now grown up, and he recognizes them. They don't recognize him. It's an amazingly emotional story. I honestly don't get how that hasn't been turned into a movie, because there's so much there. And through a long story, the family is reunited. Pharaoh hears about it, invites Israel to come with his sons to Egypt, gives them the land of Goshen, and they live there for the rest of Israel's lives. But then when Joseph dies and Pharaoh dies, a new Pharaoh rises who does not, he's not grateful to the Israelites for anything. He doesn't remember what Joseph did for them, so he enslaves the Jews, and for over 400 years they build cities for him. At which point they're just crying out to God to save them, and God sends Moses to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. He doesn't want to let the people go. I was volunteering in an inn in Amsterdam after Bible college in England when I was young, and there was a lovely team there. It was called The Shelter. Was it called The Shelter? I don't know. That's in that. There was this inn run by believers in Amsterdam, and like a guest house, and I was volunteering there for a while, and all the staff were believers, and we used to have our lunches together, and there was an Egyptian guy, a really nice Egyptian guy there, a believer, and at some point we're having lunch, and someone asked him, why is it that Egypt is so dirty? And before I thought, I just said, well, because ever since the Exodus, there's been no one left to clean up after them. But basically, let my people go. Pharaoh doesn't want to let them go, so God bestows 10 plagues on the Egyptians, one on the Jewish people, which no one ever mentions, matzah. We're forced to have matzah for 7 days every year. It gives you gas like nobody's business. You can fly to Europe without an airplane by the 3rd day of Passover. But and it's not too much fun having matzah, but we do it in memory of God saving us from Egypt. Now, God leads them into the Sinai Desert, and 40 years, don't ask me how, but we're good at wasting time sometimes. 40 years later, we cross the River Jordan from the eastern side by the city of Jericho, which is the first city in Canaan that we conquer, and then that begins the conquest of the land of Canaan, and then we are really in possession. God promised it to Abraham, but this is the first time that we're actually in possession of the land, and when the 12 tribes conquer the land, they just rename it after themselves, Israel. And then that starts a period where it's very tribal. There's no central government. Every now and again, God appoints a judge to deliver us from one of our oppressing nations, neighbors. And eventually, us Jews, we sort of like imitating the nations around us. We used to. These days, it's not the nations around us. These days, Israel loves to imitate anything that America does. It's just America's like the modern thing that we look up to. But we're always imitating the nations around us, and the people come to Samuel the prophet, and they say, how come everyone around us has a king, and we also want a king? And Samuel is a bit confused by this, and he goes to God, and God says, yeah, they're not trying to get rid of you, they're trying to get rid of me. But we'll give them a king. They'll find out it's not all the fun that they think it is, and of course Saul is anointed to be the first king of Israel. He messes up, so God sends Samuel to a city called Bethlehem, which was a completely Jewish city at the time, and he tells him to anoint one of the sons of Jesse that he'll pick. And the sons of Jesse are paraded before Samuel. They all look good, they all look tall. You know, they said about Saul that he was mishichmo v'mala, from his shoulders upwards. You know, tall, good looking. They all look like great candidates for a king, and God says, yeah, move along. Not interested. And they run out of sons, and Samuel's probably going, okay, God, we'll parade them again, but take a better look and choose. And God says, no, I didn't miss him. Just, they're not showing you the little redhead from the field that they don't think is up to anything. Have them bring him. And then little David is brought, and God says, that's the one that I can work with. So David is anointed to be the second king of Israel, and he, at some point, conquers a Jebusite city just left and down the hill from the left part of the walls of the old city. And he names that city Jerusalem, makes it the capital of Israel. It's sort of like a Washington, D.C. situation, because that city is not in the territory of the tribe of Benjamin, which is right on one side of it, and it's not in the territory of his tribe of Judah, which is on the other side of it. And he's sort of saying, we've been too tribal until now. We're going to unite, be one nation, and we're going to unite around a capital, and it's going to be Jerusalem. It's not even going to be from my tribe. It's just going to be our capital. Somehow, from the moment that that happens, the city of Jerusalem is like written on the DNA of every Jew. It's like something that every Jew longs for. There's no real explanation for it, but it's very real. Anyway, David wants to build a temple to God, so he goes up. This really used to be a hill, and he buys a threshing floor from a Jebusite guy called Aruna. But God says to him, look, I appreciate the intent, but you've got a lot of blood on your hands. You're a man of war. It won't be you, it'll be your son Solomon after you. After David, Solomon is the third king of Israel. He is the first to go up from the lower city of David. Jerusalem did not exist. All this did not exist. It was just a little neighborhood at the bottom of a very steep hill. He's the first one to go up from the city of David. He builds a temple, builds an adjacent palace, and from that point on, the city of Jerusalem starts spreading to the north, which is that way, and eventually to the west, especially a few generations later in the time of King Hezekiah. Now, as soon as Solomon builds that temple, we call that period of history the First Temple period, because the First Temple stands on Mount Moriah. Solomon's son is the next king of Israel, Rehavam. He's not very smart the way he handles the people. There's a rebellion of the 10 tribes of the north, led by a guy called Rehavam, or Rehoboam, as you call him. And the kingdom splits. The 10 tribes of the north, they retain the name Israel. The 2 tribes of Benjamin and Judah, they have the name Judah, and they're in the southern part of the country. Now, a few generations later, in the year 722, and we're jumping over a lot of biblical stories like Ahab and Jezebel, his delightful wife, which we might touch on a little bit later when we talk about sites that you see on tours. And the Assyrians conquer the land, and they basically exile the 10 tribes of the north, and they exile them, and we don't know to where. We just know that they exiled them. So those tribes are referred to as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Judah still exists. Not long, basically a lot of people from the northern kingdom of Judah who managed to not be exiled by the Assyrians escaped and set up, think of it as a refugee camp on that hill that is on top of what you don't see on the left, which is the original city of David. And they live up there. Now, at some point, King Hezekiah of Judah decides to rebel against the Assyrians as well. And he knows that it's now, because the king has died, so he's taking the opportunity to rebel and not pay any more taxes. He knows it's only a matter of time until the new king asserts his power and consolidates power, gets an army together, and comes back to try and subdue Judea and the city of Jerusalem. So he knows he needs to prepare the city for the inevitable siege that's going to take place, where they're going to operate a battering ram and try to make the walls collapse. So he embarks on a project to widen the walls of Jerusalem. And when we were in Jerusalem, we saw Hezekiah's broad wall, which we dug after the 1967 Six-Day War. It's 25 feet thick. When you actually see it in reality, it's hugely thick. You understand that it really was, they weren't messing around. It was impregnable to a battering ram. Now, Hezekiah knows it's not good enough that he just put the wall around his original city of Jerusalem, because on this high hill that you see, which is known in archaeological terms or historical as the Western Hill, that's where all the people from the kingdom of Israel, all the refugees that escaped being exiled, they've set up homes there. And the Assyrians are not going to differentiate between Jews from the kingdom of Israel and Jews from the kingdom of Judah. They're just going to butcher them when they come if they're not protected. So that's when Jerusalem grows very much, because Hezekiah makes a noble decision, although he's under really serious time pressure to complete these walls before the Assyrians come. He decides to make it a much harder project and build that broad wall all the way along the Western Hill. And he manages to complete it and to divert the waters of the Gihon Spring into a space between the original wall of Jerusalem, which is down the hill, and the extended wall around the Western Hill, and diverts the water under the city into a massive pool that he builds there. We'll show that pool. We just discovered how massive it was. John was shocked. And divert the water into that, so both the original people of the original city of Jerusalem and the refugees from the kingdom of Israel have access to water even when they can't leave the city. And the Assyrians are trying to block water, but he's already guaranteed access of the water into the city in a secret tunnel called Hezekiah's Tunnel, which is another thing. We did that, right? Hezekiah's Tunnel exists still today. The water of the Gihon Spring runs through it to this day, and you walk through it all the way to the pool of Siloam. And it's a fun deal. It's somehow people go in it a bit iffy because it's under the ground and you're going to get wet until sometimes close to your hip, but they come out of it slightly ecstatic. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's literally like now you're getting wet in the footsteps of the Bible. It's that real. And people love it. Now, not too long after that, the Babylonian army comes, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, and in the year 586, they destroy Jerusalem. They do manage to get into the walls. It's a different king. It's not Hezekiah. They destroy the first temple. That brings to a close the first temple period. For the simple reason that the first temple no longer exists, they take the people of Judah to exile into Babylon, and they're there for roughly 70 years. Now, the next empire to take this land is the Persian Empire, which conquers the Babylonians, and now they're the landlords of the whole region. And a Persian king by the name of Koresh encourages the Jews to go back to their homeland and build a temple. And they go back the period of Nehemiah, Ezra, and they build the first version of the second temple on Mount Moriah. But it's a sad-looking temple. These are people who are refugees. They're exilers. They don't have a budget. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the know-how. And it's a very sad-looking building. It's more like a shack. It doesn't even go to the biblical requirements of the height of the temple, but that's what they could do at the time. Now, the next nation to conquer this land is conquering after conquering after conquering of this land. The next nation to take it is the Greeks. They kick out the Persians. And the Greeks rule for a while, but then the last Greek monarch who ruled this land was called Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He decides to desecrate the temple by putting a statue in it and sacrificing a pig on the altar. Both of these things are abhorrent to the Jews. And a priest from the house of Hashmonai or Hasmoneans basically says, Mil Adonai Elai, who is for the Lord? Who will stand up for the Lord? Come to me. And that starts an explosive rebellion which was led by one of his sons, Judah the Maccabee. It's like Judah of the club. He was really a strong soldier. And we kick the Greeks out. And now for the first time since the destruction of the first temple, the nation of Israel is independent in their homeland. So the people love the Hasmonean priestly family, and they rise to rule the people. And the people just adore them because they restored their independence. One of the Hasmonean kings, Alexander Jannaeus, is very, very strong militarily. He conquers more and more areas that were originally part of the kingdom of David. And wherever he conquers areas, he moves Jews to those areas because in our absence, while we were in exile, different nations came in. So in order to strengthen our grasps, he moves Jews into those areas, which is what you see the Israeli government's doing in recent decades since the Six-Day War. He's so strong and he conquers so many areas that he runs out of Jewish populations to move around. And at that point, he gives the local populations one of two options. You either convert to Judaism, in which case you can stay, or you leave, but only Jews are going to live in these areas. And some people leave, some people decide to convert to Judaism and stay. In an area west of Jerusalem, there's a family that we'll talk about in a few minutes that decide to convert to Judaism. Now, the last Hasmonean monarch is a queen called Shlomzion. When she dies, she leaves the land to two of her sons. One is supposed to be the king, one is supposed to be the high priest, which is already a highly coveted and corruptly attained position even back then. And the problem is they both want to be king. So they get armies together, they battle each other, so there's a civil war between the two brothers, lots of bloodshed, but no victory to either side. It causes a lot of instability. There's some little empire at the time rising from Europe by the name of Rome, and they have a general in the area of Syria at the time, a guy by the name of Pompeius, and he notices the instability, seizes the opportunity, invades the land, and says to the two brothers, guess what? You're not going to be king, and you're not going to be king. Congratulations, you're now the province of Judea under Roman rule. That is how we lose our independence to the Romans, through sheer stupidity on behalf of these two greedy brothers. Now that starts the Roman era in our land. One of the advisors to the now fallen Hasmonean monarchy, because the Romans have deposed them, was a fellow by the name of Antipater. And he somehow just clicks with the Romans and becomes influential. They consult him a lot. He's in the court, and at some point he comes to them and he says, look, you notice that people don't like you because they don't like foreigners ruling them. They consider it their land, and they want to rule themselves. I've got an idea for you. You can use my two sons. They're able, officially we're Jews, but they're not really Jews. We had to convert because of this Hasmonean king a couple generations ago, Alexander Jannaeus. So my sons were raised Jewish. They know all the sensitivities of the Jews. They know what you must never do because it's going to cause a rebellion. But they'll be loyal to you because we love the Romans. That family really did admire the Romans. And the Romans like the idea. They take one son called Patsael and they make him the governor of Judea, the southern half of the land. The second son is a guy by the name of Herod, 25 years old, and he's sent up to be the governor of the Galilee. While in the Galilee, there's all these very religious Jewish populations in cities like Capernaum, Bethsaida, Chorazin, Arbela, Magdala, and they hate the Roman rule. They're always rebelling against the Romans. Herod shows his true colors when that happens. Although he's Jewish, officially, he responds with a very bloody iron fist, and he slaughters big amounts of Jews and spills blood like nobody's business. And the Romans look at him and they go, good God, the guy's a butcher, he's unscrupulous, and he has no morals, he spills blood like water, he's inhuman. We love him, because for their purposes, he's everything that they need. And so he gains a lot of credit with Rome. But the ousted Hasmonean king is concocting a plan with a Persian nation, always the enemies of the Romans, and apparently, actually the Persians are not our enemy, it's their leaders, the extreme IRGC. But he concocts a plan with them and he says, invade the land, reinstall me as king, and then I'll be your ally. And they do. In the year 40 BC, they invade the land of the kingdom of, well, it was the kingdom of Israel, but it's now the province of Judea. They destabilize Roman control. Herod's brother Patsael is killed / suicides in that period. And Herod barely manages to escape in a nightly battle through their ranks and deposits his family on an obscure cliff on the Judean desert right above the Dead Sea called Masada. And he goes initially to Petra, which is where his mother is from. She's a Nabatean princess. And then to Rome to get help. In Rome, Herod bumps into another friend of the family, another Roman general by the name of Mark Antony. And Mark Antony knows Herod's father. He knows Herod. He knows of his loyalty to the Romans. He takes Herod before the Senate and he says, listen, he's our man in the Middle East. We need to give this guy everything he needs in order to restore Roman rule because he is fiercely loyal to us. He's shown whenever he has a choice between his own people and us, he chooses us. And he's more than able to fight and he's more than able to rule and he's very loyal to us. The Senate buys the idea and they say, okay, we'll give you everything you need to conquer and we're sending you back not as the governor of the north because since you've more than proven your ability to rule and your loyalty to us, and since your brother is dead, we are now sending you back as the king of Judea. and they crown him king of Judea in Rome and send him back with everything he needs to start reconquering the land, and they give him an honorary title. The title is Friend of the Roman Populace, or Friend of Rome, in short. There are several privileges that come with that title to whoever holds it. One of those privileges is whatever taxes you are collecting from your constituency, and Herod's got a much larger constituency because it's not just the Galilee, it's the whole southern part of the country, and they added Syria to his constituency, so he's got a lot more people. All the taxes you collect, they're yours to spend as you wish because you hold the title Friend of Rome, and that means that Herod instantly becomes very rich. And what we're going to find, people think of Herod as very evil and demon-possessed and murderous and whatever, which is, by the way, very true, and he became increasingly mentally ill. But what people don't know is he was an incredible, unbelievable builder. And he's known as Herod the Great because of his political savvy, but because of his building projects, which were simply unbelievable. One of those projects is the reason that Mount Moriah has never been seen since he decided to mess with the mountain. Herod builds everything very large scale. So if you think of my head as Mount Moriah, and the temple is already standing on top of my head, there's no courts around the temple. But Herod wants courts because he knows that 3 times a year the Jews are commanded to come to Jerusalem during the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Weeks, which you call Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall. And historians say up to 1 million people converged on the city of Jerusalem during those 3 feasts. Now think of it, the population of Jerusalem was 80,000. So 1 million is a huge amount. Now, he wants room for all these people to converge in big state ceremonies around the temple. But nature did not provide room for courts around the temple because the sides of Mount Moriah, like my head, they go steeply down. You're going to find out about Herod that where nature does not provide, Herod provides. When nature presents an obstacle, Herod's natural response is to simply redesign nature and achieve exactly what he wants. So if you can imagine Mount Moriah, go with the terrain under the walls, you see it goes down. What he does is he starts building a row of arches all along the southern part of Mount Moriah, which is this one, then another row of arches beyond that one, and another row of arches beyond that one, brings all the arches to the level of the top of Mount Moriah, a few arches on the eastern side, which is the wall that we're looking at now, a few arches on the western side, and then if you can imagine that he takes a huge, much bigger than this actually, a huge empty shoebox, and he lifts it up into the air and then turns it upside down and lowers it carefully over Mount Moriah and all the arches that he's built, and voila, Mount Moriah has been buried under a box, never been seen since because Herod messed with it. Sorry, John. And he's achieved what he wants. He's got 14 football fields of courts around the actual temple building now, and huge ceremonies can take place there. And your church, we went up the Temple Mount, we walked there. It is a huge space. You just don't get the idea here because the Muslims planted trees, but it's a humongous open space that stretches beyond what we see to the west and beyond what we see to the right. Now, that is the way Jerusalem is when Jesus comes into the historical story, into the narrative. Jesus is not born in Jerusalem. He's born in Bethlehem, which is just south of Jerusalem. It was a very Jewish city. That's why he's born there, because everyone had to go. There was a census. Everyone had to go to where his family was originally from, and Joseph's family was originally from Bethlehem. So they go to Bethlehem, and Jesus is born. But just around that time, the Bible never says 3, and it certainly never says wise, because the event with the Parthians where Herod's brother was killed, and he was almost killed and barely got through their ranks, it has an effect on Herod's psyche. He becomes the mental stress of knowing that his people don't like him because they know he's not really Jewish and he's very loyal to Rome, not to them. The stress of that and what he saw happened to his brother makes him lose his sanity a little bit. He becomes paranoid and always is afraid that someone's trying to kill him and take his throne. And it flares up into full-blown mental illness. I think he had paranoid schizophrenia, and he starts lashing out at people all around him. Initially, it's some courtiers that he accuses. Then he takes his mother-in-law and accuses her of conspiring to take his throne. I have to say that is the one murder that every Jewish man can completely identify with and justify, is the murder of your mother-in-law. they're, you know, they have a lot of expectations of their son-in-law, and there's no way the son-in-law is ever going to live up to it, live up to them. Anyway, but then he kills his brother-in-law, his wife's brother. He married his wife for political reasons. Her name was Miriam. She was the granddaughter of the king. She was a beautiful young princess, very smart. And he thinks, wait a minute, they don't like me. But if I marry Miriam, from the Hasmonean lineage, the direct descendant of the king, any kids that I have with her will be considered Jewish because it goes by the mother. And they'll look at me like I'm reinstalling the Hasmonean line right onto the throne. So hopefully that'll guarantee my kid's life, and hopefully the people will like me for doing that, and maybe I'll also live. It's a great political plan. It works very well. There's one glitch in the program. Herod falls desperately in love with her. He completely falls head over heel in love with her, adores her, worships her, admires her. She's like his everything, but he's still Herod. He's mentally ill, and that causes, he adores her so much that she has power over him. So she persuades him, for instance, to appoint her younger brother, only 17 years old at the time, his name was Aristobulus, to appoint him the high priest. Now, she's a princess, he's a prince. He's a man, a direct descendant of the king. When he appears at the temple for the first time in his priestly robes, and all the nation is there, there is such an outpour of adulation and love and support for him, it unhinges Herod. And he thinks, okay, he's Hasmonean, the people adore him, he's going to get ideas, this is not a good situation. A while later, Aristobulus comes to visit his sister, Herod's wife, and her husband, Herod, in Jericho, where Herod had one of his many palaces. And Jericho, as I'm sure you remember, he was mentioning to me just before the service that how hot the Dead Sea area was when we were there. It's obscenely hot. And he says to him, yeah, I know it's hot, but you're in luck. I just finished building a pool. Why don't you go swim in the pool? Nothing will rejuvenate you like immersing your whole body in the pool. Now, if you're Aristobulus, 17 years old, what sounds better on a boiling hot day than jumping into a cold water pool? And Herod is kind enough to send his staff to swim with him and keep him company, with the strict instructions of make it look like an accident. And they're doing this friendly dunking, and oops, they didn't realize he can't breathe, he can't hold his breath for 20 minutes underwater. And he tries to tell his wife that it was a tragic accident. She doesn't quite buy it. From that point on, their relationship becomes very tumultuous. He adores her. She can't get over that. And he's always Herod, so there's other things that happen as well. But every time he does something, she's a Jewish princess, so they're like an accountant. When they're irritated, they come out every time with a long list of all your iniquities. And when she finishes listing all his iniquities for the first time she met him, like my mother used to say to my dad, who she adored, I don't know why I married you. I must have had a temperature. But basically, she's telling him all his iniquities, and she always adds at the end, and don't you think for a moment that I buy that cocking bull story about my brother drowning, you killed him. She knew the truth. Now, he then, at some point, he's going nuts, and when he's an old man, the New Testament never said three, never said wise, these magi, they come before him, and they say, where is the newborn king of the Jews? Not from your family, Herod, a different line. We've seen his star in the east. We've come to worship him. The dumbest thing you could have said to a megalomaniac king he's schizophrenic. He's murdered all his family members by that time, afraid that they're going to take his throne. Now he needs to hear about another line and another baby that's born. No wonder the New Testament doesn't go into the background. It just says they went before him, they said, he reacted really badly, he killed all the kids. From historical background, we know that he was a basket case at that point. He really was. And of course, Jesus has been ferried for safety into Egypt, and Herod kicks the bucket in Jericho. They think Jesus might have been 2 or 3 by the time Herod dies, and an angel tells Joseph, it's safe now, he's dead, bring him back to the land, and Joseph comes, and they settle in Nazareth, and that's where Jesus is raised. In the last week of the life of Jesus, he comes to Jerusalem for Passover. You were looking at the bottom of the screen, you're seeing the western slopes of the Mount of Olives. It's a big graveyard, and the picture is taken from the top of the hill. Just beyond the crest of the hill to the east, which is to that way, just behind you, as it were, is a little town called Bethany. And that's where Jesus stays, at the home of Mary and Martha. And every morning during Passover, he comes over the crest of the Mount of Olives where we were. And just like we did, he walks down the hill and then up to the temple and teaches. I want to, okay, see this? This is what is known as a mausoleum, a monumental tomb. That is a tomb that rich people built for themselves in order to be buried with a lot of pomp and circumstance when they die, and it will commemorate them. It will serve as a memorial for them the whole time. This is what, for instance, Herod built for himself. It's the same style. You saw the cone on the top of the one down there. This is, by the way, Herod was a very humble man. So it's 75 feet from floor to ceiling, his memorial. Now, let's go back to that picture and talk about that specific one. You see it down at the bottom of the screen, but when a man stands by it, when I stand there, there could be 10 more of me over there. Now, above me, because it's so big. The only difference between what it looks like today and what it looked like 2,000 years ago is that it was plastered white, just like the one you saw from Herod's tomb. It was beautifully plastered white. Today it isn't. Jesus has an uncanny ability when he's teaching the people. He doesn't talk in, great words or whatever. He talks in a language that they can understand at eye level and draws things that they can see in order to make a point and hit home. So when he's at the temple and he's talking about the hypocrisy of the priests, and the temple is right there where the dome of the rock, you see the golden dome. By the way, it's 75 feet from floor to ceiling. The temple was exactly there, about 150 feet from floor to ceiling, and it wasn't a dome on the top. It went straight up. So it was like very, very impressive. Now, he's at the temple, and he's talking about the hypocrisy of the priests and the Pharisees, and he says to them, you people are like whitewashed tombs. And anyone can look into this valley at that second from the Temple Mount, and they see there's several of those whitewashed tombs, and they understand what he's saying. You look nice and pure in your priestly robes, but you're full of death. And it's no wonder the New Testament says they grit their teeth. They were so angry at him, because he really pointed out to the way that they were not really leading the people. They were just into their own status. Now, he goes every day down to the Kidron Valley up to the city to teach. On the last day of his life, which is the eve of Passover, he sends his disciples to prepare the Passover meal, where we tell the story of how God freed us from Egypt. And that meal is taken on the top of the Western Hill, a little bit outside of the scope of this picture. And they go to the upper room of some place. It's called the Last Supper, the way people talk about it, but it's a Seder ceremony. It's a Passover ceremony. That night, he breaks the unleavened bread during the ceremony, gives it to Judas. Judas gets up to leave the room, and Jesus says to him, he knows exactly what's going to go on. He says, the despicable thing that you're doing, do me a favor, do it quickly. And Judas gets up, leaves the upper room, and goes to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, which is right in that area, seals a deal with him. You give me 30 pieces of silver, and I'll deliver Jesus into your hand. Away from the crowds. Jesus comes down from the Western Hill to the Kidron Valley, moves along the bottom of the Kidron Valley to just the right side of the picture, where there's a garden of olive presses, which in Hebrew is called Gan Gachmanim, Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prays. Not long after he secludes himself in prayer there, Judas arrives with Roman soldiers. He's given them a sign. The person that I step up to and kiss, that's the one you want to arrest. He kisses Jesus, they arrest him, they take him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. They can't make the charges stick, and so they bring false witnesses. They decide he's worthy of death, but the only one who can rubber stamp a death sentence is the Roman governor, and that is, of course, Pontius Pilate. He doesn't live in Jerusalem. He lives in Caesarea, but they're in luck. He's in Jerusalem now because as governor, part of his job description is during those 3 feasts when the people are in Jerusalem, you have to be there in order that if rebellion starts, you can crush it immediately. And so they just need to wait until he wakes up in the morning. They take him before Pontius, who tries him, acquits him, says, I don't know what you want with him, but they insist that he needs to be put to death. And Pontius Pilate gives up, washes his hand in a very ridiculous way, says, his blood is not on me, it's on you. And then Jesus is taken through the alleyways of the city. If you look beyond the Golden Dome, A little bit above it and to the left, you see two gray domes, a large one and a smaller one in front of it. The city walls at the time of Jesus made an L-shaped turn at the time, just before where those two domes are, and the area where the domes are was outside of the city walls. Those domes are the domes of the church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is very, very, very likely the place where Jesus was crucified and buried. That happens roughly around 29 A.D. Because Jesus was born when Herod was alive. Herod died in -4, and we know that Jesus was crucified when he was 33, so we think it's April of 29 A.D. Now, not long after that, a few decades, when we're in Israel, we take that whole story of Jesus and we follow it from place to place, but we'll do that if you come on tour. Now, a few decades later, the Great Rebellion breaks out. The Jews rebel against the Romans, and that happens in 66 AD. 4 years later, the Roman army manages to break into Jerusalem, destroys the temple, the Second Temple, and that means that the Second Temple period is closed because the Second Temple no longer exists. 62 years later, one last-ditch effort to get rid of the Romans, another rebellion led by a guy called Simon Bar Kokhba, so it's known as the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. I wear a coin from that rebellion, and it works at first, but 3 years later, Hadrian Caesar breaks into the land, is furious with the Jews for rebelling for the second time. He doesn't know what's wrong with the Jews. Why is it that they so don't like us ruling them in their own homeland? And he decides to study the issue in order to solve it. And so he studied the issues, and okay, why is the land holy to them? Because of Jerusalem. What's holy in Jerusalem? Because it had the temple in it. So if Jerusalem is what makes this land holy, let's defile it. He defiles the remains of the temple by building a pagan temple to a Greek god called Jupiter, a Greco-Roman god called Jupiter, and he decides as a humiliating death blow to the Jews to rename their land. He remembers that 1,000 years before him, there was a nation of Greeks called the Philistines that gave the Jews hell. It was only King David, who managed to deal with them. And he decides to humiliate them and rename their land Palestina, after these Greek Philistines that ruled 1,000 years earlier. Whether us Jews like it or not, that name sticks to the land like glue. Anyone who lives there at the time, ever since, is a Palestinian. Just like if I came to live in America, I'd be an American. Initially, the majority of the population is Jewish. After that, the Byzantine Empire rules, and so there's a lot of Byzantine, they become Christians. So Byzantine Christians, European Christians, come to Palestine, and they assume the identity of Palestinians. And then in the late 6th century, early 7th century, there's a guy called Muhammad in Arabia, what we know today as Saudi Arabia, because the Al Saud family rules there these days. And at age 40, he starts having visions, and eventually disseminates them in the form of the third monotheistic religion called Islam. Now, Islam takes stories from the Bible, stories from the New Testament, but changes them a little bit. It says there's mistakes. For instance, Abram, was he married? Yes. And his name was? That's because you're infidels. His name, according to the Quran, his wife's name was Hagar. Hagar is a legitimate wife. She bears his son Ishmael, and because she is a legitimate wife, his son is the legitimate heir to the prophet, to the promise that Allah made unto Abraham, unto thy seed will I give this land. It's a tiny change in the narrative, but it fixes everything from the Muslim point of view. Now, the problem with that story is that Hagar had a very immoral maid called Sarah, who was carrying on with Abram behind her back, became pregnant by him, bore a bastard child called Isaac. You get the picture. It's small changes in the narrative, but they make a huge difference. Now, the followers of Muhammad after his death start conquering areas in the Middle East. Eventually, 648 AD, they conquer the land of Palestine, and now we see a big influx for the first time of Arabians into this land, and they too assume the identity of Palestinians because they're living in a land that's been named Palestine for almost 500 years at that point. From that time, the land is basically under modern rule, Muslim rule, except for 200 brief years when the European Crusaders, from 1099 till 1290, tried to kick the Muslims out. They did briefly, but the Muslims retake the land and kick them out, and then they're back in charge of the land. The last Muslim empire to take this land is the Ottoman Turks. We mentioned them at the beginning. 1517 till 1917 is when they control this land, and that brings us right to modern times. 1917, Europe is embroiled in the First World War. The Germans are fighting with their allies, the Ottomans, against the British and the French. The British and the French win the war, and the German Empire, collapses, and the Ottoman Empire collapses as well. The British and the French come to divide the areas of the fallen Ottoman Empire in the Middle East between themselves, and they try to map out what's going to go to the British, what's going to go to the French, and it's kind of complicated, but they decide in the case of the land of Israel, which is called Palestine, they can make it, it's easier. They'll just use the Bible with the guidelines that the Bible gives to the borders of the country of Israel, and so the Bible talks about from Dan to Beersheba. So that is the borders that they draw for the land of Israel, with the Golan Heights in it, and the British get the mandate over Palestine and over areas east of Israel, of the Jordan River, known as Transjordan at the time. Today they're just the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The French get the areas northeast and north of Israel, which today we know as Syria and Lebanon. 1946, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan become independent states. England realizes it's a lose-lose deal for them, controlling this land, because the Jewish Palestinians always say you're much too pro-Arab, and the Arab Palestinians are saying to them you're much too pro-Jewish, so they decide to leave and to divide the land between the two. They get a committee that sort of maps out a map called the Map of the Division of Palestine. It goes to the United Nations Security Council to be voted on November 29th of 1947, passes, becomes legal. That means that both nations, the Jewish Palestinians and the Arab Palestinians, will be able to declare a state and call it whatever they want when the British leave. The British announced that they're going to leave 6 months later on May 15th of 1948. May 15th of 1948 was a Saturday. Jews don't do anything on the Sabbath, so they pull the Declaration of Independence to before sundown on Friday, May 14th. They declare the independent state of Israel. By that night, the Egyptians attack Tel Aviv. They bomb Tel Aviv. By the next day, 5 Arab armies, the Egyptians from the south, Jordanians from the east, the Syrians from the northeast, and the Lebanese from the north, and the Iraqis, who have no border with us but are always more than happy to crash the party. They attack Israel, and that starts a war that lasted from 1947, May of 47, till July of 1949, May of 1948 till July of 1949, so 15 months. And Israel, surprisingly, although attacked by 5 very well-armed nations, manages to hold its own without the old city of Jerusalem, which the Jordanians were too fierce, and we didn't manage to hold on to the old city of Jerusalem, but we have an independent state, small. 19 years later, in 1967, the Egyptians are breathing threats against Israel. President Nasser says we're going to free Palestine, throw the Jews into the sea, end the Zionist entity. And the Jews, the Israelis prepare, but we also see that the Jordanians and the Syrians in the north are preparing. So there's massive diplomatic efforts to avert the danger of war. But the war does break out on May 5th of 1967. And within 6 days, Israel manages to settle that war and gain a victory over all 3 nations. We take the Sinai Desert in the south from the Egyptians. The Sinai Desert alone is 3 times the size of all of Israel. The Jordan Valley, Judea, Samaria, Old City of Jerusalem, from the Jordanians, and the Golan Heights from the Syrians. 1979, we sign a peace treaty with the Egyptians that can give them the Sinai Desert back. 1993, we signed the Oslo Accords on September 13th on the White House lawn, and we give initially Gaza and Jericho to the Palestinians. 1994, we give them Bethlehem, very Jewish city where King David came from, Jesus came from, but we hand that over to them, and that basically is what brings the borders of the land of Israel to the way they are today. Now, is there anything that you would like me to go on?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think you got it all in there. I think one of the things that when we stood on the Mount of Olives and looked at the old city, and you explained to us that the temple stood, and in particular the Holy of Holies in the temple, where Abraham sacrificed Isaac.
Almost.
Yeah, it's just a remarkable, it connects the dots. You know, God is in control. That's holy ground. It's a special place. But probably a lot of people, when they look at the picture, they see the Dome of the Rock and don't understand that's not the temple. That's not the Holy of Holies. How long has the Dome of the Rock been there? And there's a third temple coming. Talk to us about that.
Well, to answer your question, the Muslims took the land in 648, and they very much acknowledge the Jewish history there. Today, the Palestinians will tell you that the Jews have no history in Palestine. They need to leave. That fails to explain the Dead Sea Scrolls. It fails to explain a lot of stuff, but basically, by 693, they built a dome over the rock on which they believed Muhammad set foot before he ascended to heaven. That is this structure. By 705, they build the structure that you see on the southern side of the Temple Mount, which is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the outermost mosque, based on a story in the Quran where the Quran never mentions Jerusalem. But there's a story in the Quran where Muhammad mounts this magical animal that sort of looks like a horse. It's got a face of a woman and a tail of a peacock, and it flies him to the outermost, the Al-Aqsa place, from which he ascended up into heaven on a ladder of fire and light and angels. And if that sounds familiar, from someone called Jacob. And he receives the abbreviated, corrected revelations, which he then comes down and disseminates as Islam. And so 705, they build the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but 693, that already existed. They've both been destroyed by earthquakes and rebuilt, because we have earthquakes in Israel. And there is a Jewish religious organization called the Third Temple Institute, or the Temple Institute, which is laying everything in place to prepare for the building of the temple again. How that is going to be done, when that is going to be done, I almost don't want to know, because, first of all, Israelis, we're very Western these days. Animal rights, you know, if the idea of sacrificing animals all the time, there'd be hell given to the religious authorities if we even tried that. But in any case, it would take, for the temple to come down, these structures would have to, for the temple to be built, these structures would have to come down, and that would be like World War III. We're not all that excited about it, especially in the last 3 years. So when it will be built, I can't tell you. I remember you told us when we were on the Temple Mount that day that they'd actually talked about building the third temple next to the Dome of the Rock. Yes, because there's space. I mean, you don't see it here, but the courts are huge. So this area over here, just to the north or to the right from your angle of the Temple Mount, there's a very big straight area, and there's some people that interpret a prophecy in the Bible where it says measure the courts and whatever, and they say that there's room for the temple to be built there. My problem with that theory is the God of the Bible, as I understand him, is not one that shares. It's not, you can serve me, and, you know, you remember the story of Ahab and the prophets of Baal. God doesn't like us worshiping others. We love it. Jews are very proud. We worship only one God. We're not like the others, the Christians who worship 3 gods. We're not like this. We worship only one God. And whatever other God is in and popular at the time. And we always get into trouble. You see that throughout the whole Old Testament. God is always sending prophet after prophet, including the story of Elijah, who is sent to King Ahab. By the way, Baal was a god he takes care of agriculture. He's the one who sends you rain. So you pray to Baal for rain. And God sends Elijah. It took me a long time to make the connection, to tell King Ahab, until I say differently, there'll be no rain in this land. In other words, it took me a long time to understand that God is just being, and Jesus is a chip off the old block. When he sees something that needs challenging, he just gets into it and he challenges. So God is saying, feel free. It's a free country. Worship Baal, pray for rain until next Christmas, but until I say otherwise, there's not going to be any rain. And of course, 3 years of famine, and then 1 Kings 18, God tells Elijah to go and meet Ahab again, and Ahab is now ticked off. He doesn't see that the problem was him and the prophets of Baal leading the nations into sin, and that's why we don't have rain. He sees Elijah as some sort of sorcerer, and he's the problem, and he says to him, is that you, O troubler of Israel? And Elijah should be wetting his pants at that point, because Ahab didn't have a great reputation. Remember Naboth the Jezreelite? He wanted him to sell him his vineyard. He wouldn't. Ahab sulks. Jezebel, a lovely, genteel lady, says to him, oh, what's the problem? Just kill the darn guy and take the flipping vineyard and let's finish this. And he does that. So Elijah should be terrified, especially when Ahab meets him and says, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" But he completely turns around and he says, "I'm not the troubler of Israel. You and your father's house are." By the way, typical Israeli to involve the parents. But Elijah is very correct. Ahab's father was a king called Omri. He was also an evil king. And there's this whole showdown, which we won't go into now. But it took me years until I suddenly made another connection. When we're at school in Israel, in the Israeli educational system, when we study agriculture, we learn that there's two types of agriculture in Israel. There's shalchin, which means sent, which means that type of agriculture is dependent on us irrigating the fields. Water that we send to the fields with pipes, with drips, with whatever. The second type is a type of agriculture that is rain dependent, and whatever rain it gets, that lasts it for the whole winter. It never rains in Israel in summer, so whatever rain it gets in winter, that will last until the next winter, like olive trees, and for instance. And that kind of agriculture is called Baal agriculture. I never made the connection until one day when I was there with my 20th group or something, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the God of rain. We, to this day, for some reason, don't ask me why, we call agriculture that is dependent on rain Baal agriculture. It's unfortunate, but we're very loyal to the God of Israel and any other hot religious trend of any period. Just the way we are. This is one thing that we do on tour. This is a village just on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee called Capernaum. Jesus moved there when he was 30 years old, lived in the home of Peter. It's really Peter's mother-in-law's home that he moves into. If you remember, the New Testament mentions it was her home. One time Peter and Jesus returned to Capernaum. The mother-in-law, well, Peter's mother-in-law, is sick. She's got a fever, and Jesus goes in and heals her. And we always say Peter never forgave him for that one. You know, no wonder he denied him 3 times when Jesus was in trouble. You know, you healed my mother-in-law. That's something that we don't get over. Anyway, this is the synagogue of Capernaum, and that is a place where Jesus read the scriptures several times. There's one day when he was healing. You read in the New Testament, they brought a lot of people to be healed in the synagogue that day. Now, it's a Jewish country. Someone's doing something for free, in this case, healing you for free. Even if you're feeling perfectly healthy, you're going to develop a headache and go there and take advantage of that issue. And everyone came that day. The lady of the house, if you remember, they had to undo the tiles of the house in order to bring a guy who was paralyzed, lower him with a stretcher. She probably was not very delighted at that miracle that Jesus did, and she's going, "Jesus, bubby, you fix the tiles before you leave," because we're still Jewish. But Capernaum is a place that means a heck of a lot to a lot of Christians that go there. This is the Sea of Galilee, and we typically do a boat ride on a wooden boat. That's the Golan Heights in the distance. It's a really beautiful, pristine, largely unchanged area. It hasn't changed from the time of Jesus. What you see is just we're looking right now from the western shore towards the eastern shore. By the way, in the time of Jesus, those eastern shores were not part of the Jewish land. Those were, it's an area called the Decapolis. Deca means 10, polis, city. There were 10 Greek cities, pagan cities, that lived autonomously under the Romans. They paid their taxes, and the Romans let them run their affairs. Jews never went there because we didn't mix with the pagans. However, Jesus several times in the New Testament, and the Bible says it suspiciously every time, sailed to the other side, which Jews didn't do. I think what's going on is, remember, Jesus was Jewish. The only reason he had such crowds following him is because they saw that he seems to be fulfilling a lot of biblical prophecies about the Messiah and how to recognize him. So he's got all these crowds following him. It was a uniquely Jewish concept, a Messiah, one God. Nobody else believed in that, only Jews. That one God has one Messiah. It was very uniquely Jewish. And Jews don't proselytize other nations. But Jesus knows that the idea is for the gospel to go, yes, to the Jews first, but then to the Gentiles. And he knows that the disciples, they can't grasp that concept yet, because it's really seen as something very internal. So when Jesus goes to the other side, to the pagans, he's really creating an overture and telling them, and I don't think they worked it out until only in retrospect after his crucifixion, but he's saying, you're going to have to bite the bullet at some point. And because the idea is you're going to be a light to the nations. Hello, the nations, the other side and the whole Gentile world. And I don't think they really get it. Think of Simon the Tanner on the rooftop of, Peter on the rooftop of Simon the Tanner's house in Jaffa. And he sees this vision, a sheep coming down from heaven, all these unclean animals, and a voice that says, arise, Peter, slaughter and eat. And he says, I can't. These are unclean. And the voice says, what I've said is clean, don't you call unclean. And it happens 3 times, and the sheep disappears, and Peter is still trying to figure out what the heck this was all about. And there's people knocking on the door, but they're sent by a Roman centurion called Cornelius from Caesarea, who is searching for the truth. If they had come 20 minutes earlier before Peter had this vision, he would have said, "Nuh-uh, you're not Jewish. This is something very Jewish, where, you have your own gods, go worship them, ask them how to live your life, not us." But it required a vision. It required it 3 times, because Peter is a Galilean redneck. We call him Saint Peter. He's not very saintly initially. He improves in time, but remember at the Garden of Gethsemane, as soon as Jesus is arrested, he pulls out a saintly knife and cuts off someone's ear. He's a diamond, but a diamond in the rough initially. But it's a very Jewish concept, and Capernaum is where a lot of stuff happened. We go all over the country looking at a lot of stuff.
I felt like Capernaum, well, the whole Sea of Galilee region, you feel peace up there. You feel the presence of Jesus. You go to the places you know he was at and where he talked and where he spoke and where he healed. And then you go into Jerusalem, and I felt like we walked into Manhattan. It was just so busy, so crowded, and you almost lost that. I could have spent the whole trip in Galilee.
Because Jerusalem, all the crazies of all 3 religions center on that city.
Yeah.
It's very intense, it's very busy, and
Including
they all
the
have
Christians.
shops. What's that?
Including the crazies of the Christians, right?
The Jews, the Christians, the Arab, all the crazies of all 3 religions are centered there. It's theirs as far as all 3 of them are concerned.
All tracing back to Abraham.
All of them. My grandfather was an Iraqi Jew. He used to say, I can trace back our family tree all the way back to Queen Esther. And I leaned over to my dad and said, you don't dare look up that family tree. It'll trace us all the way back to Saddam Hussein. Because my grandfather had some fancy ideas that didn't seem very... I didn't believe that. I mean, he's Iraqi. She was Persian anyway. Persian Jewish.
I mean, when you're going across this body of water in this boat, the guys who are driving the boat, they know what they're doing. They're working for a nice tip. We get on the boat, and they got Waymaker playing over the stereo system, and you're going across the water singing Waymaker, Miracle Worker.
Oh, yeah. They know what music to put for you.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. But it's so peaceful. It's so amazing.
And people love that boat ride somehow as well. It's very calm. The Galilee is very calm, and it's very calming. It's very pristine. It wasn't, by the way, in the time of Jesus, because all these right-wing religious Jews live there. They hate the Romans. There's always rebellions. That's why, by the way, when Jesus is on the Mount of Beatitudes, and that's right near a cliff called Arbel, where Herod crushed another rebellion really severely by hooking Jews out of caves on a cliff and throwing them off the cliff to their death because they were rebelling against Rome. And when Jesus is on the Mount of Beatitudes, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth. Calm down. It's not all about ownership. You're missing the big thing. I'm here to deal with the problem between you and God. My agenda isn't currently complete independence. There's a lot of stuff that you don't understand that the New Testament just mentions, but when we put it in context, especially in its Jewish-Israeli context, everything comes back to life, and it seems to mean a lot to people.
One of the cool things was you showed us some of the crazy stuff that Herod built. The mountain that he created, Herodium and Masada. Talk to us about that. Show some of those pictures. To think that a man created a mountain.
Well, it's a very unique man. When you look at it from a distance, it just looks like a mountain, almost like that had its head cut off. It dominates the Judean desert. When you come up to it, you suddenly see that it is a palace that he built over. This whole mountain, by the way, is what your president would call fake news. There were 2 hills there. That is where he decided to build the one fortress that he's going to name after himself, Herodium. And that is exactly where the Parthians had intercepted him and where he almost committed suicide and then came into his own and decided, I'm Herod, I don't die, I fight till the death. And so that's probably why he decides to build the fortress there. That's where he came into his own. And it's the only project he builds after him, he names after himself. And there's a whole palace there with 4 towers. You're looking at the biggest one, which is the eastern tower, from which when you look down to the east, you completely see the Dead Sea. And the blue Dead Sea against the yellow desert. It's very impressive. But it had 4 towers, and it had a triclinium, it had royal residences, it had a royal bathhouse, very plush. It had a garden that was very plush. There's no water in the Judean desert. How are you going to have a garden? But where nature does not provide, Herod provides. Inside this fake mountain, which he basically, there was a hill there, he just made it higher. And inside he carved these massive cisterns, and he brought an aqueduct from a distance that would bring water to Herodium. I mean, Herod is simply incredible. He's an absolute genius, and he's an absolute basket case, and he's a twisted, rotten character. I'm his #1 fan, but I wouldn't want to meet him because he really was a very dangerous man, especially as he got older. By the way, Caesarea is where Herod builds a palace. You can see this this square over here. That's the main section of the palace with the columns, but he always has an out-of-bounds section to his palace as well, and it's usually nature-defying. In Masada, the out-of-bounds palace where he really splashes out is a 3-leveled, 3-tiered palace that he hangs on 3 massive steps that he carves into the cliff with amazing views. In Caesarea, he decides that he wants to build the lower level of his palace into the Mediterranean Sea, and he does that by taking advantage of a newly discovered Roman technology called hydraulic cement, where they discovered if you mix volcanic ash with seawater, it just becomes like concrete. And he built a complete artificial port, the largest port in the ancient world. And he uses the same technology to build the lower level of the palace into the Mediterranean Sea, complete, by the way, with a reflecting pool. You can see there's a pool in the middle, and it's very big. That pool is surrounded by columns. The columns have capitals on them that are beautifully carved and painted with frescoes, beautiful, brilliant colors. And those capitals support a ceiling which has all these beautiful geometric shapes in plaster. And the water is a reflecting pool. It's not a deep pool in that case, not like the one in Jericho. It's meant to be still so that the water reflects the beautiful columns and the capitals and the geometric shapes in the ceiling. Now, in winter, when it's very cold, that could be very, it's windy, there's big waves that crash into the place. It could be very damp and uncomfortable unless you installed furnaces under the palace and there's underground heating all through the winter, which means that the dampness evaporates. It's beautiful and toasty and warm. Herod achieves whatever he wants to achieve. People are amazed when they see what Herod does. They're amazed when they see stuff that other people did. By the way, his palace is where they have the Praetorium, a jail which we just dug. It wasn't open when you guys were there, but there's a jail under the palace where important prisoners were held. That is where Paul the Apostle is held for 2 years. Now get this.
Oh, we didn't get to see that.
Because it wasn't open at the time. They knew it was there, they hadn't dug it out.
Wow.
And that is...
Guess I gotta go back.
That's when we can go when you come next time. And it's great. There's always new stuff to see. Now get this. He's in a praetorium under the palace. This oval shape that you see is the hippodrome, where they have chariot races and athletic competitions. Now, when Paul talks about the faith, he equates the faith to the run of a guy who runs races. And he says, I don't carry weights, I set the goal, I set my eyes on the goal before me, and I run fast. And he's talking in all these athletic terms. You don't get the impression that Paul the Apostle is an athlete. His tongue is very athletic. He likes to pontificate a point to the death. He's a Jewish rabbi. You've already gotten the point 3 chapters ago, but he's still going on. He's also very humble. He's saying, imitate me as I imitate Christ. He's very Jewish, very much of a rabbi. But his Jewish knowledge, by the way, if people think that you stop being a Jew when you become a Christian or when you believe in Jesus, You can see in Paul that that is not the case. Paul really believes in Jesus, but he is so Jewish. He loves at any opportunity to talk about his troubles. He's always better than you are. He likes to say, I don't want to boast, but if I wanted to boast, I would say this. You know, you think you're educated. Oh, ho, I'm educated. You think you've studied. I've studied so much. You think you're smart. I'm a lot smarter. You think you've suffered. Oh, ho, have I suffered? And then he gives you a long list. I've been flogged. I've been shipwrecked. I've been this. I've been that. He's talking about his troubles. Believe me, you don't stop being Jewish when you believe in Jesus, and Paul is the ultimate proof. Now, how is he suddenly...
Culture is culture.
What's
Culture is
culture? Culture is culture. If complaining was a sport, we'd be Olympic champions. I mean, really, we would be. Now, how is he talking about, where is he getting these athletic terms that he's talking about? Well, he's in the jail right near the Hippodrome. He's got like a front view seat for 2 years of incarceration to the whole Roman culture of athletic competitions, races, all that stuff. And his genius as a rabbi is that he figures out, okay, if I'm ministering to the non-Jews and trying to get them to understand a concept that is foreign to them, one God, one Messiah, I can package it in terms that they can relate to, and then he talks about it in athletic terms, and that's probably one of the reasons that his ministry it just spreads so fast, because he knows how to talk to people. He talks to them in terms that they can understand. People, you're going to love Herod. By the way, this is the pool of Siloam. This is what we had when you were in Israel, right? In the pool of Siloam. Now watch what we dug since you were there. The camera's going to go. I was there a few months ago. The pool of Siloam was way deeper than we thought. There's about 30 feet there. There's flights of stairs you have to get. Look at the people. When we were there, the ground was at this level.
Yes.
I mean, they're always digging, they're always finding, and it ended with a dam. You see a dam at the end there.
Oh.
People are very impressed, unless I did have one tourist years ago. Her name was Donna. And it was a tour with a televangelist who signed people up from his TV show. So it wasn't people from a church who know each other. It was people who watch his program in different countries of the world. They come on many flights, and there's about 7 buses that he comes with every year. And one year when I guided one of those buses, there was a woman called Donna. And Donna came, she flew in straight from hell on Lucifer Airlines flight number 666 with nonstop service from hell. And she hit the ground complaining. Every site we went, Capernaum, people are loving it. And she had one thing that she said, more rocks. And we go to Caesarea, oh, more rocks. And site after site, we go to Ancient Dan with a Bible. It's like a pop-up card. And she's going, what's here? More rocks. Oh, mud and rocks. Because it had rained the day before. And then, you know, she complains and she complains and she complains. And she says, where are we going next? And I said, a city called Hazor. And she said, what's there? More rocks. And I said, well, you could look at it that way, but it's a very interesting palace. It's a very interesting story. And we get into the bus to go there, and she shoves a pack of cards into my hand, and she says, I want you to play these Bible trivia cards. And I said, okay. And she goes, from the microphone. She's like instructing me, but I'm game. You have a little bit of a drive, so yalla, let's pass the time. And so I tell the people on the bus, we're going to play Bible trivia, test your Bible knowledge, courtesy of Donna's cards. And I say, right, let's go. And I pull the first card out, and it says, God used my staff to part the Red Sea. Who am I? And they all go, Moses. Christians know their Bible. And I said, yes, that's true. And I pull the next card out, and it says, my mother gave me to Eli, and he raised me at the temple. Who am I? And they all go, Samuel. And I said, that's true. Strictly speaking, yes, his mother gave him to Eli, but he raised him at the tabernacle. The temple wasn't built until much later by the third king of Israel, King Solomon. And they all go, oh, yes, that's right. And except for Donna, she's sitting halfway down the bus. She shoots me a look of death. How dare I challenge her biblical trivia cards? And we, you know, question after question, they know all the answers. And then I pull out another one, and I go, okay, here's the next question. I am the first martyr. What is my name? And they all go, Stephen. And I said, yes, that's right. Do you remember how he was martyred? And they said, he was stoned. And I said, do you remember what his last words were? And they all look at me, and I said, more rocks! But as you guys say, bless her heart, she complained her way through the tour. A few days later, we're on the bus, and she's complaining about something. And I just said, Donna, are you sure that you're Christian? And the whole bus goes, oh. And she goes, yes, why? And I said, well, it's just at the rate you're complaining, I could swear that you're Jewish. And the whole bus goes, you know, but she goes, Mama says she thinks we're part Jewish. I said to her, your mama's right. I'm telling you right now, you're more than part Jewish. And she says, well, can I immigrate to Israel? Can I receive citizenship? And I said, well, if you can prove that you're part Jewish, then yes, you can. She goes, what do I have to do to prove it? And I was going to tell her the official paper. And then I said, just turn up at the airport and be yourself. They'll give you a passport. They'll know you're Jewish. She was like pulling teeth, but you know, she didn't mean badly. It's just that was her way of relating to people, I guess.
Tell us about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Which are very strange because the Jews have no history in this land and they need to go back to Europe. But somehow, 2,000 years ago, actually we tested those, carbon dated them, it's 2,200 years ago, in the Hasmonean monarchy period before even the Romans took over, a bunch of Jews called, hid a whole bunch of biblical scrolls in the Judean desert. We think that it might have been scrolls that were in the temple. They were written a couple hundred years later, but we think they might have been in part of the library of the temple. And during the Great Rebellion, in anticipation that the temple might be destroyed by the Romans, which it ended up unfortunately being destroyed, that we think they might have smuggled the heritage on all these scrolls away and put them in these caves at the Dead Sea. Now, 1947, you remember we said 1947, November 29th, the United Nations Security Council votes on the plan for the partition of Palestine. It becomes legal. Israel gets way less than we have today. The Arab nation, the Arab Palestinians get way more than they have today, way more than they'll have even if we give them everything that they're asking for, which we probably won't. And there's a lot, the Jews say yes, even though we get very little, and they say, thank God, after 2,000 years of exile, we'll take what we can. The Arab world and the Palestinians say absolutely not. And a whole big issue develops leading up to that vote of both nations trying to influence the nations of the world in the United Nations Security Council to vote, in our case, for the plan. The Palestinian Arabs, they are getting them to vote against the plan. What we don't know is that at the same time, November 1947, there's two Bedouin shepherds, about 17 years old, in an area in the north of the Dead Sea called Qumran, and they're herding their sheep. One of the goats goes missing, and so they do what shepherds do. They just they see a cave, and they lift a stone and they throw it into a cave to try and scare the goat to come back out and join the herd. And what they hear when the stone lands is the sound of clay breaking. They climb in, they go back and deposit the sheep and the goats in the pen. They come back the next day and they climb into that cave and they find about a whole bunch of clay jars about this high. And when they open the lids, they find what they see as leather, because scrolls were written on biblical parchment, on parchment, and which is like animal skin. Now, there's not a goat big enough, for instance, for the 60-some chapters of Isaiah, so you sew different pieces of parchment together and you roll them up. That's how biblical scrolls were. And so they just see them as leather, so they take them to Bethlehem and sell them to him to be used as insoles for shoes. But a Jewish archaeologist by the name of Sukenik finds out, he hears rumors, goes down to Bethlehem, manages to take a look at a couple of scrolls, jumps out of his skin. This is just when both nations are trying to influence the world to vote for and against. So the Palestinians are saying they're not from this area, they shouldn't be here, they don't have any history here. Send them back to Europe. And he goes to David Ben-Gurion, who was the leader of the Jewish population in the land and later declares independence and becomes our first prime minister. And he says, this is the most important discovery in 2,000 years. We must get our hands on these scrolls, and we offer a sum of money for every scroll that they'll hand over. It's a long story, but eventually we get, there were 800 scrolls found there. We have a big majority of them. They included all the books of the Old Testament except for the book of Esther, which somehow isn't there. It may have been washed out in a different flood in a different cave, but two full scrolls of Isaiah, one of them, by the way, has just been pulled out of the vaults for the first time in several decades and is on display in the Israel Museum for a limited amount of time. When I saw it in 1940, I wasn't existing, 2008, in honor of Israel's 60th anniversary, I was at the Shrine of the Book looking at one of these scrolls, and I suddenly got goosebumps. And I'm secular, but I got these goosebumps because I'm reading in Hebrew, and I know an Israeli Jew like me, but 2,000 years ago, so he wore different clothes, was writing these in Hebrew, and I can read these 2,000 years later. So I'm getting all these goosebumps, and I thought, wait, let's go to the beginning, see if it's like the Israeli version of the modern printed version of Isaiah takes off. And so I go all the way to the beginning, which is to the right, and I see that it starts exactly like my printed Bible, the same Divrei Yeshayahu ben Amos. And I was shocked. I'm getting these goosebumps, and then I'm translating for my tourists as quickly as I can, and I'm saying, let's try and look for famous sections of the book. It's all blocks of text. They didn't have chapters and verses at the time. And I look and look and look, and suddenly I see, how lovely on the mountains are the feet of the one who brings good news. It says to Zion, your God reigns. And I'm getting these waves of goosebumps. And then I look further, and suddenly I see, we know it as Isaiah 53, who has believed our report, upon whom has the mighty arm of God been revealed. And I'm translating as quickly as I can. And the tourists are getting, they're just shocked as well that this is original from 2,200 years ago. And I suddenly said, wait a minute. No. The Jews came from Europe. Don't let this confuse you. They have no history here. It's amazing, but somehow there's so much stuff in that land that we're still finding that roots us there.
Do you have a picture by chance of Masada on there?
I don't think there's a picture of Masada. That looks like, yep. That is a cliff that, you remember I said Herod breaks through the ranks of the Parthians to deposits his family on a cliff in the Judean desert. That is that cliff. When he comes back 3 years later, he deposits them there because he's hoping that out of sight is out of mind. And when he comes back as king 3 years later, he hurries to Masada, finds his family still alive, and he's delighted, obviously, because he doesn't want anyone else to kill them. He's going to kill them himself over the next few decades. But he realizes Masada is a very important location, and he builds it into this magnificent, unbelievable, and, as always for Herod, nature-defying fortress, which we toured. 1,000,000 degrees heat, but the tourists are always amazed at that place, and another place called Beit Shean in the north of Israel, which is just stunning sights. And what Herod achieved in Masada with defying nature and supplying water in the middle of the desert. And then there's a story, because 70 years after Herod's death, the rebels who were trying to kick the Romans out, they took the fortress, and that is where the final showdown between the Roman army and the one last stronghold of Jews in the land, which is Masada, took place. And in 73 AD, the Romans brought it down, and that was the last piece of Jewish independence for 2,000 years until May 14th of 1948.
And that's the Dead Sea in the distance.
That's the Dead Sea in the distance,
yeah.
Where you float whether you want to or not. That's another thing that really gets tourists, is you don't have to know to swim. You don't have to know how to float. There's no option. Your body bops up because of the makeup of the water, 30% salt.
He's brilliant, is he not? He knows it. Come on, give it up for him. Well, John, let's do some Q&A. We're 90 minutes in. And just if you have a question for Shmulik, raise your hand and keep them up high till John gets to you. I see one back there to your left, John, about halfway back. Yeah, stand up. There you go.
I can already imagine the question. Are you ever going to shut up?
Thank you for talking to us tonight. So 2 questions. Will Turkey let us get to Mount Ararat to find Noah's Ark? And secondly, is it possible to find the Ark of the Covenant?
Ooh.
Let's start with easy ones.
Well, Noah's Ark we will never find in the land of Israel because it landed on a mountain called Ararat, which is believed to be in today's Armenia. There are different expeditions that think that they found stuff that indicates that it is Noah's Ark. I can't confirm or deny any of them because until I see it for myself or study it very seriously, I wouldn't venture an opinion. With regard to the Ark of the Covenant, we would love to find it. The Bible tells us that just when the Babylonians were getting ready to break into the city, the king of Judah hid it in a cave, basically under the Temple Mount somewhere. Yeah, something's caught. Thank you. Under the Temple Mount somewhere. We haven't found it. The Muslims do not like us digging in the area of the Temple Mount because although we were never there, there's all this stuff with Hebrew inscriptions that we find buried under the rubble. And there's a lot like around the temple. There's so many ritual baths. When Herod built this massive platform around the temple for hundreds of thousands of Jews, he knows that the Bible requires that every Jew, before going after the temple, man or woman, has to be ritually bathed. And so he completely layers the whole place with lots and lots of ritual baths so people could efficiently get ritually bathed before going up to the temple without standing for hours in line. By the way, I like to think that when Herod was on his deathbed, a few months after or maybe a year after he tried to kill Jesus, he's on his deathbed in Jericho, and God comes to him and says, Herod, you're going to die soon, but I just want to say thank you. You've built amazing stuff, and you're going to be known as Herod the Great. People will be talking about you for thousands of years. I just want to say, my son that you tried to kill, he's fine. Don't worry. You're going to kick the bucket in about 20 minutes, and I'll have him brought back. But I just want to thank you for those ritual baths that you built around the temple in Jerusalem, because there's going to be a situation in 30-some years, and one of my son's disciples will be talking to crowds on the southern steps of the temple, which you can see coming down from the temple on the left, and telling them the story of my son, and they'll say, what must we do to be saved? And he'll tell them, repent and be baptized, which would have been a crisis because there's no water in Jerusalem for 3,000 people to be baptized. So I just want to thank you for building those ritual baths, because it's a no-brainer. They're just going to disappear into the ritual baths. It's going to be really easy. And I want to thank you for the artificial port that you built in Caesarea, because my son's followers are going to use that port to sail the gospel of my son to the Roman Empire that you love so much, until the whole Roman Empire figures, if you can't beat them, join them, and they're all going to become believers in my son. And with that thought, Herod kicked the bucket. And Herod dies having tried to kill Jesus, and he doesn't know he's laid all the infrastructure for the efficient spreading of the gospel in Jerusalem to the Jews, and from Caesarea, the efficient spreading of the gospel to the Western world and the Gentiles.
Isn't that good? That's so good. Another question. Right here, down all the way down here, John. Stand up so he can see who you, there you go. John, you're going to get your exercise. It needs to be me doing this, not you.
I'm just wondering, what's the perspective of a Jew, a modern-day Jew, of Christians, specifically Western Christians?
I didn't hear the question.
What's the perspective of Jewish people towards Christians, in particular Western Christians?
That's actually a good, that's actually a great question. It depends, because the Crusaders came and, to free the land from the Muslims, but they butchered a whole lot of Jews and Muslims, by the way, as on their way to Jerusalem. They butchered Europeans. They ransacked, raped, and pillaged their way through Europe and then through Asia until they got into Israel. And they were Crusaders. They were doing it by the behest of a pope called Urban IV, who was angry about the Muslims destroying the first version of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was an octagonal church with a dome on top. And he says, how dare they destroy the church where our Lord was buried? Anyone who frees this land from these people will have all his sins forgiven and will receive eternal life. That means that every European got a carte blanche to just, it doesn't matter what you do on the way, as long as you're part of those who freed the land, anything that you did on the way is forgiven and you go to heaven. And so all these angry Europeans, a lot of them outlaws, they just get into these groups and they just rape and pillage and destroy their way through Europe, but they're doing it in the name of Jesus. So a lot of Jews, over the centuries, things have happened in the name of Jesus to Jews, and so a lot of Jews used to see them as enemies. Today, there's a lot of people in America. Everyone knows Donald Trump is pro-Israel. Everyone in Israel knows Donald Trump is voted because all the Christians in America that love Israel are wanting him to be in charge because he's going to be good for Israel. So Israelis these days know that American Christians are not that type of Christians, and a lot of Western Christians are our best friends, and the media says it. You know, the Christians these days are our best hope, especially in America, because they are very pro-Israel, and if you're an Israeli, you're very grateful for that. So they really do appreciate that. Not to mention that tourism, okay, it hasn't existed in the last 3 years, but tourism depends on, tourism means guides who guide, drivers who drive the buses, anyone who works in hotels, housekeeping, restaurants, service, front desk, they make money off it. People who operate the boats in the Sea of Galilee, gift shops, don't we know, they're all dependent on tourists. And so, and the majority of tourists in Israel are Christian. And so the opinion is changing these days. There's much more appreciation as opposed to hatred or fear.
What's the current state of things for you over there?
It's a blast.
Literally.
You know, what can I say? Usually the media makes it way, 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 way worse than it is, you know. And the conflict is usually in areas that tourists don't go to anyway. Obviously, the last 3 years have been a lot more complicated and a lot more, they've been horrifically sad because things happened that we never imagined could happen to Israelis in Israel. The whole purpose of the State of Israel was so that what happened in 2,000 years of Israel and culminated in 6 million Jews being massacred during the Second World War will not happen again. Now we have an army to protect us. It worked amazingly for 70 years, almost, a little bit over 70 years, until October 7th, where our army, our government, and our army, everyone messed up really big. And so it's been a very complex 3 years. Israel was in an incredibly precarious position on October 7th because the Hamas was attacking from the southwest, expecting Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah in the north, which is there in southern Lebanon, to invade northern Israel. We knew that Hezbollah was preparing, and then the Israeli Arabs to join. For some reason, thank God, Hassan Nasrallah did not invade the next day, but the whole of northern Israel was evacuated just in case, and remained evacuated for a very long time. And we had the Houthis from Yemen sending ballistic missiles. We had the Iranians sending. But today, I mean, when you look at the situation, as precarious as it was on October 7th, Hezbollah has really been hit very hard. September 17th of 2024, I was in New Jersey having lunch, and the taxi was going to pick me up and take me to JFK for my flight back to Israel. Until then, Israel just received. All of the northern Israel had been bombed for 11 months, but we didn't respond because we were focusing on the Gaza Strip. And I'm sitting at lunch and I get a push notification on my phone, and it says, reports are emerging from Lebanon about multiple beepers exploding simultaneously, all of them on Hezbollah soldiers. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, welcome back to the game, Israel. This had Israel written all over it in capital letters. And I get on my flight, and it's an overnight flight, so the next day, September 17th, we're just about to land in Israel, and I get a push notification. Reports are surfacing from Lebanon of multiple walkie-talkies exploding on Hezbollah soldiers at the funerals of their friends who were killed the day before. And that started the turnaround against Lebanon. We really hit them hard. Hezbollah has been their leader is gone. The leader that said that there's nothing left of Israel except cobwebs, and we've sent him to sainthood as well. The Syrians overthrew their government, and their president, Bashar al-Assad, left, and Israel took the opportunity to bomb every piece of military equipment, their navies, their planes, their ground forces, all their ammunition, so that they will not be able to attack us either. Iran, President Khamenei, dear man, who is no longer with us since February 28th. So things are very different in Israel today. It was horrifically precarious on October 7th. Somehow, it's been horrible, but we find ourselves in a much, much, much different situation today. And for the first time, you and us fought hand in hand this winter in Iran. not against the Iranians. Our government has told us for decades that our problem is not the Iranian people. They suffer from their government as much as we do. They suffer much more from their government as much as we do. Obviously, it turned on us a little bit with the ballistic missiles, which was not too much fun. But hopefully, if we can finish that job, Trump is in this sort of a period now where he's giving them a second and a third and a fourth chance. But if ever we're able to get a change of regime in Iran and the Iranians take hold of their country and they demand that all the rich resources of their country be internalized and poured into the country, into them, because people there are desperately poor and everything is very expensive, then that would mean that the money is not funneled to support and fund Hezbollah in the north of Israel or Hamas in the southwest of Israel. Things will be, or the Houthis in 2,000 kilometers south of us in Yemen. Things are looking a lot better than they were. We just need to clean up the act, and we're hoping that we get to fight alongside you guys. That was the first. Israel always rooted for America when America was at war. America always rooted for Israel and supported us when we were at war. But February was the first time that we fought hand in hand together, and we were doing, all of us, a very good job. God forgive me, but we were doing a very good job, and I hope we complete it.
Another question. Yeah, right over here. We got one there, one there. While John's making his way, for perspective, you made a comment on one of our days on the bus. I don't know if you made it to everybody, but you certainly made it to me. And sometimes I don't think we see the perspective the way you do because you're in it. We're watching it from a distance. You said, I know we're God's chosen people, but sometimes I wish God would choose another people.
Oh my God. And after October 7th, I wrote a whole post and I said, God, it's time that you chose someone else. Just choose someone else for a while. It's too much. This covenant has not been good for us. Most of the years we've been in exile. It was just, this is what it means to be a chosen nation. It's like, give it to someone else.
It's because it's a spiritual battle.
It's
not a fleshly battle.
It's sometimes tough.
Yeah. Where we at? Right here.
Herod. You keep talking about Herod on all these designs he did and the water he brought in and changed from hills to mountains or whatever he did. Did the guy have a team of engineers or did he do this all on his own?
Did Herod have a team of engineers?
Yes.
Did Herod have a team of engineers or did he build all this on his own?
Oh, Herod had the best of the best engineers, architects. He had lots of projects going on simultaneously. Now, he traveled between them, but you see the one thing in common in all his projects is the brilliance, the thinking I want to say thinking outside the box. I don't think there was a box where Herod was concerned, where there's thinking. There were boxes called coffins for his relatives, but there wasn't a box that he thought in. And you see the brilliance in all his projects, and you see the same nature-defying tendencies, and he always has his way with nature. I mean, yes, he was a complete madman. He was a deranged, twisted lunatic at the end, but he was an incredible, incredible builder. And it's definitely him behind the projects, but by the way, no one liked him. No one liked him, but they loved the temple that he built. They loved the cities that he built. And the land went under a financial boom when he was king because anyone who wanted to work had a job. Now, let's think of one other thing. Let me just see if I can pull it up. When he builds the temple, this is Herod's second temple. These are the courts when he finished expanding it. Today, the city wall, this wall is a city wall, and you see that there's a box. We saw it with the southern side, so you saw that it's literally a box that covers Mount Moriah, but now you see the extreme courts. Now, who's going to do the inside of the temple for Herod? Only priests are allowed to enter the temple. And Herod, again, proves his genius. He takes 10,000 priests and builds them as masons, and they do all the building and the gold plating on the inside. That's the only period in Jewish history where our priests worked. Herod really was amazing. Now, when he builds at the very back of the building, the western side, the farther side of the building, that's the Holy of Holies. When you look at the door First of all, there's an outer court with the 4 chambers, the chamber of the oil, the chamber of the wood, the chamber of the lepers, and the chambers of the Nazarenes. Then there's another gate, and that is the gate, never mind, it's names to everything. But only Levites and priests can go beyond that gate to the court directly around the temple building itself where the altar is. Only priests can enter the temple. At the back of the temple, only the high priest can enter, because that's the Holy of Holies, and he can only enter one day a year. When you don't work, you don't eat, you pray and fast and beg God to forgive your sins. Now, Herod's not going to sleep at night if the Holy of Holies is undecorated and not done to the utmost degree. But what's he going to do? Herod proves to us that he's more Jewish than we gave him credit for. The expertise of any real Jew is to fully bypass God's law while outwardly appearing to be keeping it. He has an idea, checks it with the priest, and it sticks from the halachic Jewish law point of view, and they authorize it. He goes onto the top of the temple, undoes the tiles over the Holy of Holies, builds wooden cages, lowers them with pulleys into the Holy of Holies, making sure that the cage does not touch the floor or the walls. And he's got his workers in the cage, and through the bars of the cage, they do the decorating and the gold plating and all that. Now, they're not in the Holy of Holies. We wouldn't dream of it. We would never even think of going in. But they are, but they're not. And I mean, and it's all decorated. Herod he always proves to us that we don't give him a lot of credit for being Jewish, but he's quite Jewish, and he's very able.
Would you tell us some stories about some of your tour groups that you had?
What, the Golden Girls?
I don't know. You told us so many. They'd love to hear just a couple of them.
I'll tell you one that had American Jews on it. That was an agency that had tried to hire me many times and was not able to because I was always booked up. Well, 2008, you guys had your subprime crisis in America, and a lot of people lost money, so a lot of the tours canceled. And then that agency contacts me, and I was available, so I started working for them. But it's a different agency. It's not Christian churches. They also do that. But it's dates of trips to Israel, and anyone can sign up online, whether you're Christian, Jewish, religious, secular, anyone can sign up. And the agent preps me, and he says, now, Shmulik, they're going to hit the ground complaining. And I said, uh-oh, what happened? And he said, no, they're just going to complain. I said, okay, about what? He said, you don't get it, Shmulik. They're American Jews. They're going to arrive complaining. And the first flight comes. They bring them to me at the airport, and I managed to say the words, welcome to Israel. And one of them surges forward. I remember to this day, her name was June. And she goes, they don't serve Diet Sprite on this airline. They only serve Diet 7-Up. I don't touch that poison. Why don't they serve Diet Sprite? And I'm thinking, oh my God. You know, this they didn't teach us in tour guide school. You know, they stopped through Poland, and so they came on some Polish airline, whatever, Auschwitz Airlines. And how am I supposed to know why that airline serves this drink and not that drink? Well, they complained from morning. Why does the sun rise in the east? Why is it setting in the... June said, it's hot. I said, yes, it is hot. It's too hot. I said, well, they didn't tell us it's going to be this hot. I said, you knew that you were coming to Israel. And she says, yes. And I said, you know that Israel is the Middle East. Yes. And I said, and you know that you're arriving on August 30th, the hottest month of the year. Yes, but they didn't tell us it's going to be this hot. I mean, just complaining for the sake of it. They complained and complained, and I got stressed at first. It's as if I'm used to Christians. They appreciate everything. And they're complaining, and a few days later, we're driving by the Dead Sea, and I can see Mount Nebo. So I said to them, oh, that is Mount Nebo. That is where Moses went up because he wasn't allowed to enter the land because he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. So God took him up to Mount Nebo. He could see the land. He couldn't enter, and he died on Mount Nebo. And my insides immediately said, yeah, he died on Mount Nebo. He wasn't allowed to enter the land. After 40 years with these complaining Israelis, he was not interested. He died from massive blood loss due to slashing his own wrists, but I couldn't say it. Anyway, on one of the tours, there was these 4 older ladies from Florida, Jewish ladies, adorable, funny as funny could be, outrageously funny, and we go through the whole land, and they are absolutely beyond adorable. And my mistake was that I didn't write everything that they said because I thought it's so outrageous I'll never forget, but there was too much of it. Anyway, at the end of the tour, there was an extension to Jordan, and they were on it, and I get a phone call from the agent, and they say June's family is trying to reach her. And I said, well, she's going to be back from Jordan in just a couple hours. She's in room 719. Have her family call the hotel and ask for 719. I'll tell her to be in her room from 6 till 7 p.m. And the bus arrives back. I tell June to go there and to be in her room from 6 to 7. About 7:15 p.m., I see her coming out of the elevator in the lobby. And I went over to her and I said, June, did your family reach you? And she says, yes. And I said, is everything okay? And she goes, well, my husband died. And I said, oh my God, June, I'm so sorry. And she goes, thank you, Bubba. I said, do you want to pull up your flight? And she says, I haven't thought of it yet. Of course, he had to die when I'm on vacation. He couldn't die any other time, only when I'm on vacation. So I'm like, okay. And, you know, I said, well, here's my room number, here's my cell number. Anything you need, call me anytime. And they have dinners at restaurants. You know, everyone chooses where to eat. So I went to a restaurant near the hotel, and as the hostess is about to sit me down, I hear, no, 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 bring him over here. And I look and I see my 4 golden girls, Jewish golden girls. And they say, come on, Shmulik, we gotta feed. Look at you, skin and bones. Come on, you're gonna eat. And I sit down, and at some point I said, June, have you given any more thought to whether or not you want to pull up your flight? And she goes, you know, Bubala, I have. And the answer is no. And I said, oh. And she says, we're leaving on Saturday. We're gonna arrive in the U.S. on Sunday. He's being cremated Monday morning. Why should I pull up my flight? I'm staying with my friends. So I said, oh, okay. And then another of the girls, Judy, she says, now, June, you're coming to lunch with us on Monday. We do lunch every Monday. And she says, I can't come to lunch. She goes, why can't you come to lunch? And she says, because my husband's being cremated Monday morning. He's ruined it again. They're all the same. And all the 3 others go, they're all the same. If they can ruin it, they'll ruin it. And one of them leans over to me and she says, it's her 4th husband, by the way. And I said, what? And she says, yes, it's her 4th husband. The woman's dangerous. And they're all laughing. And June says, stop it, it's not nice. And Judy says, well, no, it's not. But it's true. You know, and they all laugh. And she says, stop it, I don't know what's going on. And Judy leans over to me and she goes, she's getting richer. That's what's going on. Anyway, then that's when the other lady says, are you coming to lunch? And she says, I can't come to lunch. Why can't you come to lunch? Because he's being cremated Monday morning. Oh, he's ruined it. They're all the same. They're all the same. And then June the lady says to June, wait a minute. What do you mean you can't come to lunch? And the woman says, June says to her, well, because he's being cremated Monday morning. That's why I can't come to lunch. And she says, listen to yourself, June. He's being cremated Monday morning. He'll be in a jar by lunchtime. Just bring him along. And June goes, oh, that's right. I'm in, girls. I'm in. I'll take him out to lunch one last time. You know, and they're laughing their heads off. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, no one will believe me. No one will believe me. You have a lot of outrageous stuff happen on tours.
Can we get your question real quick? Yeah, just speak loud. Yeah. Just speak loud enough where we hear you.
Well, I was raised in a religious family, and I left religion because there was some stuff that I just couldn't reconcile, and I decided that I'm just going to leave those things alone. Now, there's a lot of stuff in prophecy that, because I was raised reading the Bible, and I have eyes and I have ears, I look and I think, oh my God, that's exactly, but I try not to get into it because I don't want to be in the kind of turmoil that I was at the time. There's a lot of stuff that is suspiciously familiar to me that's happening, and I think, well, that's exactly what, he wrote or he wrote. I try myself not to deal with it because I had a lot of unhappiness in those years. So I try not to delve into that stuff more.
All right, so it's 2 minutes till 7. And a couple things that I want to make sure we share tonight. First of all is this. when you see this in living color with your own eyes, when you're standing on the Mount of Olives, it takes your breath away if you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Because when you're standing there, you can see the Eastern Gate. And you see the Eastern Gate is walled up. The Muslims have walled it up as if that's going to stop Jesus when he returns. And it's just breathtaking to see the city. You don't see that day one. It's like day 4 or 5 on the trip before you get to Jerusalem. It's just breathtaking. I'm telling you that because I hope someday you can stand there and see that from the Mount of Olives with your own eyes. We're hoping and praying that we're going in November. It's still iffy, right? It's still iffy. By the way, when we were there in 2023, we heard jets go over, and we're like, what was that? And you go, oh, they shot some missiles at us last night. They didn't make it here, but we're just going down to make sure they know who we are, right? So
I have no recollection.
Yeah.
I honestly don't.
I'm just telling you, I don't know there'll ever be a time to be in Israel where something could happen, but obviously tensions are high right now. So we're praying and hoping in November we can go. And there's a lot of people already committed to go who've paid money to go. Pastor Greg and Dee Jones from our staff are going. So cross your fingers, pray that all works out. The second thing is, because of everything that's going on in Israel, you have not been able to do tours for 3 years.
Yep.
And so your livelihood has been affected, like
Very.
COVID and now this. And
Yep.
so one of the reasons why you're in the States is you're doing things like this to help support your work, your call, your ministry. You have a ministry.
To stay in my apartment.
Yeah.
That I waited 7 years for.
Yeah, so Rock Creek is giving Shmulik an honorarium for being here tonight, but we're going to flip up this slide right here, this slide with your QR code and your picture. I believe you've
I
got
don't
it.
have that one.
Yeah, I think it's in there. Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Oh, okay, there should be another one with a QR code in the package. There it is. If you would like to support and help Shmulik out through this season of not being able to work, because he is a tour guide. By the way, he has a degree in tourism and Israeli history. And uniquely, you told us that anytime another site is found, you have to go back to school to learn about that site.
Well, we have to do at least one refresher course every year, but a guide who wants to remain relevant obviously wants to study. Like when I went to the pool of Siloam, because I heard of all this, and I was dumbfounded by everything they discovered. And you want to go, because part of the thing is, you know that when you show your Bible-believing tourists, they are going to flip. And the one thing that keeps me energized is seeing lights switch on in tourist eyes. And, they say the Bible just comes to life. It becomes like it's the difference between a black and white movie and seeing it in full color. And it's a lot of joy. And coming back to the issue of safety, I always ask my tourists, usually on the first morning, I tell them, are your family and friends very worried about you being in Israel? Yes. Are they sure that you made a terrible, if not fatal, mistake by coming to Israel and you're dodging? They go, oh my God, that's exactly it. And I tell them, look, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to provide that experience for you because Israel is very calm. Stuff happens around the borders, but you're not, even if it happens while you're here, you're not going to be able to see it. But I will point out every time we pass by soldiers. And when I do, take a picture of the soldiers and take a picture with the soldiers, because your family is developing a deeper relationship with God while you're here because they're so terrified for you and praying for your safety than you're going to be developing. So at least take some pictures with soldiers. Tell them, yes, you're right. It's terrible. It's dangerous. Thank you for praying. Keep praying. But really, it's like so calm. The majority of the time, it's like the most calm place. People say they feel safer there.
I felt safer in the entire country of Israel than I do in Chicago. Because when I have to go to Chicago, I don't venture out.
Yeah.
I felt very safe in Israel. We were always with a group, obviously, but the places we stay, the places we eat, the travel, very safe. Even going into Bethlehem, I felt safe.
Yep.
And so I just want you to know that don't believe the narrative that it's unsafe, because it is. Shmulik is the best. He's a walking Bible. He's the best.
Oh, stop it. Please continue.
And no, we're thankful for you. If you're interested in going in November, John is your connection with Legacy Tours. He's your connection. Talk to John about that. I know they would love to take you with them. Thank you for coming to Rock Creek.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Let me mention that if these QR codes are not working on your phone, we have them up here that are better quality. Just come up here and snap it. And if you want to give via Zelle, you have to open your bank app. That's important to know. So open your bank app, snap it in Zelle, and you'll be able to support Shmulik.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pastor.
Man, we've been looking forward to this. Even if you were still over there doing tours, we wanted to do this. And so we've been looking forward to having you here. And so thanks for coming and hanging out with us. Thank you guys for spending 2 hours of your life tonight learning more about Israel. Isn't the story of God incredible? And the story of the nation of Israel incredible? And how it all weaves together and the dots connect. And I'll say this is why you ought to go to Israel. If you go to church here, and many of you, most of you probably in the room do, would you say that I changed in my preaching when I got back from Israel? It's not because I'm a better preacher, it's because I saw it with my own eyes. And it changed my perspective because I saw all these places I've been reading about and studying about, that they actually exist. And then to see how Jesus used imagery, how Paul used imagery, and how they used stories and parables, and they wrote about the things they saw to relate that to modern people in a way they could understand. It changes the dynamic. So if you can go. If you can get there, get there. So once again,
I'm biased, but I do agree. I
Yeah.
really think I've seen people for decades saying, changed my life, trip of a lifetime, changed the way I see the Bible, changed the way I understand the Bible. I would, not just because I want to work, but it really does seem to change people's lives.
but you enjoy what you do.
I love what I do.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, you can tell. You get to a place and he's on the off the bus and he's on the run. And you got to run like crazy to keep up with him because he's short and you can't see him in the crowds.
I have no idea what he's talking about when he says short.
The funniest thing I'll say, and then we'll be done, is when you took us to the Holocaust Museum, you told us, guys, you need 3 days to go through this museum. Be back on the bus in 30 minutes. Go. And we all went to find the 2 trees, right? We went to find Schindler's tree and the Corrie ten Boom's tree, take pictures with it, and then get back on the bus. But it's an incredible trip. Once again, say thanks to Shmulik for being here. God
Thank
bless
you guys. Thank you very, very much. Thanks a lot.
God bless you guys. You're dismissed.